delighted today for a number of reasons, including the discussion we've just had about family origins in advance of Peter's talk this morning. But I'm just delighted to introduce Peter Ciriscioli, who's going to speak today about his longstanding work on policy issues associated with autonomous vehicles. AVs are in the news continuously. I think I share probably everyone's opinion that we'd like to, if these vehicles actually become part of our transportation system, they ought to be introduced to the marketplace in ways that are safe. And right now, I'm not convinced that we're at that stage. Peter, I think, has made a very sustained effort to try to address that question. And so, Peter, I'm just delighted to have you with us today. I thank you for getting up early. By the way, Peter's in the San Francisco area, so it's a bit early in the morning. But I thank you for joining us this morning, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation, Peter. Welcome. Welcome to the Wilson Forum.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm really happy to talk to all of you. One of my aims today is to hopefully enlist you all into my effort to get our government to take action about regulating autonomous vehicles. I think it's necessary based on, my experience of just following them in the news that we really need to do something to ensure that they're safe enough to be on the roads. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. And one of the things, Ron, I'm not quite sure how to share my slides here. So,
there is at the bottom of your screen, you should please share. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. Okay. So, one participant can share at a time, it says, which is me, I guess.
Yeah.
And but how do I actually get my slides to come up onto the screen? Do I just
Wait a minute. You know what? I have your. Let's see if I can find him, Peter. Hold on just a sec. I'll have to search for him just a minute here.
Okay, no worries.
Archive draft. Sure, we're getting close. Incidentally, we edit these before they're broadcast, so anything we're doing now will be edited. This is your slide presentation, I think. Hold on a minute.
Yeah, I think that might be the one that says last update, really.
Yeah. Hold on just a sec. I think we're getting close. That's it, right?
Yeah, I'd have to see the date, but I think that's the one.
Let's see if I can now share. Here we go.
Here we go.
Good. And I think you're all set to go.
Okay.
There you go. Full screen. How's that?
Full screen would be great. I don't see it as a full screen, but oh, there we go. Okay. So let me just go on. Oh, you'll have to drive for me because I push the buttons, but nothing happens.
Oh, let's see if what happened. Yeah, I can
There
do
we
that.
go. So this is just, it gives you a clue.
Yeah. Just tell me when you want me to move the slide. I'll do that.
Okay, do the next one because it just is a brief outline of what we're going to talk about today. What I want to do is kind of get everybody on the same page so that we all know about where autonomous vehicles, the state of them in their development really is. And I'm sure if you're like me and you're following something like this, I mean, it's fascinating, the technology and everything else that's going on with it. So you probably have an idea. And so it won't take much to kind of get us where we need to be so that I can ask or show you what the key questions are. And then I'll compare the way that autonomous vehicles are being developed today to some classic complex development programs and show you how dangerous things have been developed safely in the past. And then really answer the question, in my view, how can autonomous vehicles be developed safely? Because it's not happening that way now. Okay, please go on to the next one. So here's where we are. Autonomous vehicle regulatory efforts are actually happening around the world in Australia, Canada, China, Germany, New Zealand, the UK, and the USA. And the USA isn't even leading. The British have passed in Parliament an Automated Vehicles Act. And on the slide, you see that those words underlined like a link. And in the presentation that you have on that actually does go to a link that goes to the website for the act. So when you see these throughout my presentation, you can just click on those if you want. I mean, afterwards, for example, to get to the information. But they passed that law just the 20th of May, just a couple of months ago. And they're going ahead. And it's a big deal in the UK. It was announced in the King's Speech this year, and the AV Act, as they call it, is advanced technology to safely let vehicles drive themselves on British roads. And again, there's the link to they call it an all-party parliamentary group. And it's the British way of getting their different parties all to work together on a particular subject. And it actually seems to work. So maybe some of that will spread to the United States, especially in view of our last election. And for my contribution to that, I received a recognition. And this is the contribution I made. And it's really the thing that I want us all to kind of reach an understanding with and hopefully will accept or even agree with. And get our government to do the same thing. And that's having a law that requires self-driving vehicles to achieve a level of safety at least as high as careful and competent human drivers. And that's the British way of saying it, and they're much better at English than I am because I just say average human drivers, because every human driver on the road today in the United States has passed a driving test, which to me means that they're careful and competent. And so that's it would be great if self-driving cars are just as safe as the drivers all around us on the roads every day. And they need to meet rigorous safety checks before they're being allowed onto the roads. And I'll show you why that is, because so far they've been really dangerous. Okay, let's go to the next one. So I'm going to just kind of give you a state of the development of the technology. And where we are today is that Tesla continues to advocate for unrestricted autonomous vehicle deployment. They want to be able to just sell people autonomous vehicles and let the people who are willing to trust their life to them use them all over the roads and highways anywhere in the United States. And Elon Musk, of course, is leading or owns Tesla, and he's called for a federal approval process in the most recent earnings call that they had just last October. And he said there should be a federal approval process for autonomous vehicles. I was so happy to read that after all the other things that he's said and done. And he added, if there's a Department of Government Efficiency, he'll try to help make that happen for everyone, not just Tesla. And this Department of Government Efficiency you probably read about in the news. It's Elon Musk's idea that the government needs that. And he wants Trump to appoint him as the leader of that department. So that will be an interesting thing to see if it actually happens. But Musk also said during the call that he expects Tesla to have unsupervised, fully autonomous vehicles on the road in Texas and California next year, pending state approval. And he said that he would be shocked if the company did not get approval, but that he thinks in general it would be better if autonomous vehicles were approved on the federal level. And the thing that he didn't mention on the earnings call, and remember it was for Wall Street, but still it should have been mentioned because investors would be probably value it, is he didn't say that he had any plan to release independently conducted safety validation data, which demonstrates that the vehicles are safe, at least as safe as the average human driver. Or he didn't say if there were any other defined level of safety that his vehicles meet. He just said he wants to release them on everybody. That's kind of the way I think of it. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, and by the way, if you would like to ask a question or have a comment or something, please feel free to interrupt me in this, because what I'm hoping for is that we have a dialogue or a discussion to kind of get this all going. So here's where we are today, as of April 26th this year. And the federal authorities say that a critical safety gap in Tesla's autopilot system contributed to at least 467 collisions, 13 of them resulting in fatalities, and many others resulting in serious injuries. And that's I've been in engineering development programs for aerospace and defense industry and everything my whole career. And that's an astonishingly bad record, safety record for any system development that I know about. I mean, I can't think of a single fatality in any of my employment history on developing anything. So this is it's incredible. And then I want to just add another little fact. There are at least 15 companies right now driving their autonomous vehicles, test driving their autonomous vehicles around roads and highways right now in the United States with no restrictions on what they have to do, except they have to have a safety driver. And that just seems to me like experimenting on the public. And it's just it's still, as an engineer, I'm shocked by that. So yeah, I wanted to confess those things because I think you need to hear my bias about that. Okay, next slide, please.
Peter, before we continue, I saw that Tom Opar had his hand raised.
Oh.
Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think you might have just answered it, but I think on your previous slide, when you said they were looking for, having the car sort of act at the 50% threshold, the average threshold. Yeah, I was going to just say there's no system at all like that. And would seem that a better way to look at it would be, in sort of number of miles driven, how many accidents per mile. If you already have fatalities with just a handful of these cars, you're right. That's
amazing, and I have some data I'm going to show you about that.
Okay.
So if you go on
to
the next slide after the one I was just on.
Well, let's go to Eddie because.
Okay. There's another one.
Another hand up. Go ahead, Eddie.
Yes. Under what conditions were these collisions? For example, if they were on highways or whether in small roads, is it possible, for example, you could restrict the use of autonomous vehicles only in places where they can be deemed safe?
It's possible to do it that way. The conditions are as just like the conditions on any road. I mean, around the Bay Area, in San Francisco, on the roads, night and day, different times of the day, they have not been, they're experiments, but they're uncontrolled experiments in a sense, because they're just driving the vehicles around to accumulate miles. And, I don't even know if they record the conditions. They just do it. And the whole goal that it appears to be sitting here from the outside is to accumulate a number of miles so they can say, we've driven, 50 million miles, and so now the vehicles are safe somehow magically. It's not controlled in any way, and it's not like any other development program I've ever participated in, when people are trying to experiment and say something is working or not working, because they don't really have a criteria for success that they're measuring themselves against. They're just accumulating miles. And so in one way,
let me ask a question too, Peter.
Sure.
When Elon Musk or other folks talk about federal or state approval, what are the metrics? What are the standards that they would use to make that judgment?
No mention.
None.
There's nothing. This is, October 23rd. So it was just a couple of weeks ago. He didn't say anything about what metrics or how to test it or how the regulation should be or anything else. He just said there should be a federal approval process, and that was it. And I think what he wants is a process that lets him deploy its vehicles and is a barrier to entry for anybody else in the market.
So it could say approval means US made as opposed to Japanese made or whatever.
I can guess. I can only guess. But what I'm guessing is he wants the approval process to be that somebody has to follow what he's done, which is millions of miles driven with their vehicles before the federal government will give the approval. And if you think about the cost of driving millions of miles, in some cases even more than that, hundreds of millions of miles, at whatever it takes, just figure 20 cents a mile or something, that's going to prohibit a lot of competition. And I see Marv has his hand up.
Yeah. Marv, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Let me get back on. Okay, so I appreciate everything you're saying, and I'm just we did a couple of meetings on AI, and it just strikes me that these are not separate issues. So I'm just would like your context about control and the process. AVs are one aspect, but without AI, they wouldn't exist. And so they're really an embodiment of AI. And so how we go about with the attitude we have from a business point of view, from a governmental point of view, from a military point of view, towards limiting or controlling or testing or setting guidelines for any of these, I think are the same for the specifics of AV and for the general of AI. And I just wanted to get your comment on that.
I agree with you. This is the first instance, really, of an AI application that has the possibility to affect someone's life in a very meaningful way. And the comments that you just made me think of my thesis defense back in 1990, because there was a big debate about whether something was AI or not at the time during my oral exams. And it comes down to that very question. This is only the first, I think, of many applications. There'll be medicine. There'll be a lot of other things that have the chance to injure or kill somebody. And there, at the moment, is no standard process that ensures that before people can actually use them commercially, that they'll be safe. It's kind of like maybe the beginnings of the drug industry were, when people just, cooked up some chemistry and started selling it to people. And that's why I mentioned quackery in the beginning, because I think there'll be a lot of that as people start to make money.
No, I agree. So in a real sense, AVs are the canary in the mine.
Absolutely.
They're the first practical test of how we can go about integrating remarkable new technology that may not be technically controllable, but we first have to have an agreement that we need to have controls. And this is something very practical. So I just wanted to cast it in that light.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
Let's take Bob. Bob has a question too. Let's go on to Bob.
Peter, first of all, because this is going to suggest a kind of counter argument, or at least a question that's counter to what you've been saying, I do want to emphasize that I strongly support what you're doing and the principal objective of all of this. But two things. I don't know how many of us on the call today on the forum are Tesla drivers. I am. I've had a Tesla now for 4 years. I've been using full self-drive, including the improvement that's occurred with neural net technology, and I'll share that with the group when you get to your section on your comments on where the systems now stand as such. But I wanted to read you a section on their report of data, what we've just been going through, and then you can correct it, say that this is according to Tesla, so you can say that it's simply wrong in some fashion. But I'm going to read what it says. Vehicles using autopilot in Q1 2024 recorded an average of 7.63 million miles driven per accident. This marks a 47% year-over-year improvement and establishes a new record, with the previous highest being 6.57 million miles per accident in Q1 2022. Throughout 2023, this figure ranged between 5.18 and 6.18 million miles. And then this final sentence: remarkably, the autopilot safety metric is approximately 11 times higher than the US average for all vehicles. And Tesla has been saying itself that the safety rating for drivers using autopilot in Tesla is higher than for Tesla drivers not using autopilot. So I'd be interested in how you react to the way Tesla is making this report.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. And to be honest, I don't believe it, because they claim that, but where's the data? And I'm going to show you another data point in a few minutes that really doesn't say that's true at all. And it's an uncontrolled test, so it could also just be including miles running around an oval track. And doesn't really represent a controlled environment at all. So what really needs to happen, and it's really the summary, is and the message I've been writing to our government stakeholders, we need to have an independent safety validation test. And all of us who drive cars have to take a test before we can drive our car anywhere. And I think the government can just do the same thing for self-driving cars. If you have a self-driving car, it should be able to pass a test, just like Boeing has to pass a qualification test for their airplanes. And if you make another airplane just like the first one that went through the qualification test, you don't have to do the entire qualification test over again, but you do have to prove that you made it the same way. And that should be the way all those control processes should be put in place for autonomous vehicles as well. And one of the things, and I also, full disclosure, have a Tesla, which has full self-driving on it, which when I first got the car, I drove it, I got it, picked it up in Houston. And by the time I got to Austin, I turned off the full self-driving because of so many false control movements by the car. Every line that wasn't painted perfectly on the road caused the car to swerve and do something dangerous, and I constantly had to intervene. And it just was clearly not safe, and my nerves were shot. So I turned it off and haven't used it since. But I'm a big fan of Tesla. I think the cars are fabulous, and I can't wait for self-driving, especially as I get older, because I think it's going to be key for my mobility and my ability to stay in my house. So I want them to happen, but they have to be safe.
This is a very interesting conversation, but I wanted you to get through your presentation, because I know there's more to come. But let me just say, Eddie, is your question related to this conversation?
Yes, that was really where my original question was heading, was the conditions under which not only the accidents occur, but I don't know if you're going to follow it up later with how you see a regulatory test actually working.
I am. I'm getting to that.
So I would love to see that, because you go on the back roads in Quebec, say, and it's a very different kind of driving experience to driving on a highway.
Yep, exactly. I mean, we have to have that.
That's coming up. We'll go on to the next slide, Peter.
Please. So here's where we are with Tesla. And the feds have said there's a critical safety gap in the autopilot system. And they cite at least 467 collisions and 13 fatalities and many others that have resulted in serious injuries. And, like I was saying, that's just unprecedented in my entire career, to have a development program with that many injuries and deaths. And it's just, I can't imagine what it was like when steam engines were first developed, or cars were first put into into the world, with horses and buggies and everything else, but that just seems incredible to me. I mean, I don't know why this keeps going. And that's one of my questions. Please go to the next one. So here's some more about where we are. The data shows clear flaws in the Tesla's autopilot technology as tested in real time on our highways now. And they're having more severe and fatal crashes than people, than the standard driver, people in a normal data set, Missy Cummings said, from the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency in response to a story in the Washington Post that is cited here in 2023. And her statement is consistent with the San Francisco Metro Transit Authority, Jeffrey Tillman's statements about GM's Cruise, which has been banned in San Francisco, because based on the data they had in San Francisco, the Cruise vehicle was 6.3 times more dangerous than a human driver. So why would you accept that in an autonomous vehicle when, I mean, why would any human say, let's go get in something that's more dangerous than the other drivers around us on the road? And then let's go to the next slide. In October, the California Department of 2023, the California DMV revoked the operating permit for Cruise. And you probably read about them or heard about them in the news. They had some very serious incidents, one of them in which they hit a pedestrian and dragged her under the car. So they just said, no more testing Cruise. On July 28th of this year, Cruise announced that they're going to relaunch their driverless ride-hailing, and they're planning to do that in different places. And they didn't, they haven't really cited any improvements or safety data or anything else. So it's kind of one of those things. It's still from General Motors, it's still a just trust us, which to me isn't okay when lives are at stake. But money continues to flow into the autonomous vehicle developers. The opportunity is huge from a business perspective, and they're spending billions and billions of dollars in it. And Waymo just got $5.6 billion in new funding to expand to new cities. And, they say they're already doing 10,000 paid weekly trips. And they have fully autonomous freeway operations. That's freeway. It's a different environment in Phoenix and San Francisco. And they want to test systems with more complex environments like Buffalo. You can imagine it's the weather in Buffalo, like snow and so on. New York, because of the complexity and the number of people and the density. In Washington, D.C., I imagine many of you have driven around Washington, D.C. and know it feels like a nightmare. But, that's their test environment. And what about all the other drivers that are out there while these people are testing their cars? I mean, as an engineer, I'm kind of like, what, is anybody asking for their permission to have a test vehicle that could possibly kill them around them? But that's kind of another thing. And I get to a couple of questions, but it's one of the ones that kind of haunts me, and questions that haunts me. But where we are right now is that the autonomous vehicle developers are relying on miles driven on public roads to demonstrate that their vehicles are safe enough. So let's take a look at that, and just go to the next slide. And that's the question. Can miles driven be used to validate that autonomous vehicles are safe enough? And the RAND Corporation actually studied that problem back in 2016. And I have the findings listed here on this slide, but the one that I've bolded is the important one for us right now, because they say, at least for fatalities and injuries, test driving alone cannot provide sufficient evidence for demonstrating autonomous vehicle safety. And they also say, and it's the first bullet that say autonomous vehicles would have to be driven hundreds of millions of miles and sometimes hundreds of billions of miles to demonstrate their reliability in terms of fatalities and injuries. And if you place that in the context of just Tesla and how many miles they've already driven, and then add on to that the other 14 autonomous vehicle development companies that are actually working right now and testing in the public domain. We're talking about thousands of people that could die while people are developing their autonomous vehicles. And not only that, but it would take a long time. I mean, just the Rand Corporation said, it would be tens, sometimes hundreds of years before they could actually establish mathematically that the autonomous vehicles are safe enough for public use. So it's just not practical to use miles driven. And I think any engineer would say, yeah, or now I can't say that because Tesla's full of engineers, but I'd say most engineers with a past would say that. And so the Rand Corporation recommends there has to be something done. The developers of the technology and third-party testers need to develop innovative methods of demonstrating reliability. Something needs to be done to ensure that they're safe enough. And they say even with that, you may not be certain that they're going to be perfectly safe, which to me is kind of okay because I don't think autonomous vehicles will ever be perfect. There'll be fatalities, there'll be injuries. But the real thing that I think we should strive for is that they should be at least as safe as everybody on the road today. And then that's kind of one of the things that is important to me about any regulation is the ability to improve it. And so the Rand Corporation kind of agrees with that when they say the regulations should be adaptive, so that as the technology improves, the regulations improve. And I can give you an example from the Trident missile program, which I worked on years ago. There's a particular test that was run on that program. They test a part of the actual missile, fully loaded, and test it to destruction. So it was tested in the manufacturing process, and it was destroyed to see if it was strong enough, basically. And that was a really nice test for that particular manufactured part. But it didn't say anything really about the rest of the manufactured parts just like it that were used in the vehicles, in missiles. It just said that one was good. And throughout the entire Trident program, which is the one before the program we have now, that was the C4 program, the missile never failed. The manufactured parts never failed that test, and they cost $1 million a piece to run. So the Navy was smart. They said, we spent $1 million on these tests. We've run basically hundreds of these tests. We've never really learned anything from them except every time we've passed the test. Let's not run that test anymore on the Trident II. So they adapted their government requirements for the missile to say we don't have to do the test to destruction of test articles made for the structure of that missile. It was a really great decision. And in the beginning, when they designed that test, nobody knew what would happen over time with those missiles popping out of submarines. So they tested to be sure they thought everything would still work. So the same thing will happen for self-driving cars. If we have a driver's test that has an obstacle avoidance section in it, and no self-driving car ever fails that test over several years, or why keep doing it? I mean, they've proven that it's not necessary. Just ensure that they're still made the same way and you don't have to do that test. So that's what I think of when they say an adaptive test. Okay, next slide. And these are questions I have, and it's one of the reasons I become involved in this in the first place. I've been writing letters to our government for several years now. But why is our government continuing to allow uncontrolled autonomous vehicle developer tests in the public domain? It's a threat to the innocent bystander. And why haven't the autonomous vehicles used established and safe technical development processes and adapted them for autonomous vehicles? And there's lots of examples, and I'll talk about a couple of them. But basically, the answers to those questions are unknown, and I think that's kind of a tragedy of engineering, to be honest. Okay, next one, please. So here's an example of a safe developing process in its drugs development. And we have in our government, in the FDA, a Center for Drug Evaluation and Research that evaluates new drugs. I mean, we've all heard about it, you know, when new drugs are developed and how they go through these test programs and people volunteer. But there's actually a center that oversees all of that. And what they do is they prevent quackery. And I like this, it's actually on the website. But they also provide doctors and patients the information they need to use medicines wisely. And I think that's another benefit I hadn't thought about that can also apply to self-driving cars, because once everybody knows that they're safe and have undergone certain tests, they can also understand how they can use them and still be safe. And that would be a benefit to everyone to know that you know, they can be used safely. And it reminds me of getting into an elevator. You just get in these days and push the button, and you go to the floors you need to go to, not thinking that there may be hundreds of feet between the floor of the elevator and the ground below, because it's been tested and it's safe. So. I really like this from the FDA. And go to the next one. And this is an example of a safe development process. I've talked already about the Trident II missile. This is one of the safety or one of the validation tests for the Trident II missile. It's a video that is in the public domain, but it shows, you know, a validation test. Here it goes.
Well,
now imagine if they hadn't done that test, and instead the first test was launching a missile with carrying a bunch of nuclear warheads. That wouldn't have been a good thing to have happened. So it's the same kind of life-critical technology that needed to be tested. And before actually anybody risked their life or risk another person's life with it. And it's viewed in, at least in the Department of Defense, as a fantastically successful program over the years. And that test was run decades ago. I worked on that program in the 1990s. And since that time, it's been safe the entire time. Okay, next slide, please. This is an example of another kind of safety validation test for vehicles. And you might remember back in the early days of the Iraq War, and if you look at this chart, you'll see on the vertical axis, they call it hostile deaths per 100,000 troop years. And a troop year is equivalent to a single soldier serving for a period of a year. So if you have 100,000 troops in theater, then 1 year, that's 100,000 troop years. And it started out in Iraq, and we had a lot of troops there. Back in the early 2000s, we were at this rate approaching 250, and I'll talk about the Afghanistan one in a second. And then there was a surge that happened around the 2006 timeframe, and I'm sure everybody probably remembers some of this. And then all of a sudden, we introduced a new vehicle, and there was a statistically significant change in that, and the death rate went down, way down, less than 50 per 100,000 troop year. I keep getting mixed up. 100 per 100,000 troop years. And the reason was that the Department of Defense took action to say that this death rate's unacceptable. We have to develop a different vehicle. So they did. It was called the mine-resistant ambush protected vehicle. And one of the things that happened, and I was involved in that. I actually led the development of that, of the first vehicles for that. And we got this feedback back from the theater in the form of this little picture, which is that this truck saved my life as well as 5 others on the 2nd of April, 2008 at 2300 in Basra, Iraq, and he signed it. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most rewarding things that I've ever had happening to me. But it was an incredible effort to just save some lives and protect people. And the thing that made that possible were blast tests and the knowledge we had and the technology we had, but it was validated by tests that would actually work. So please show the next one. This is what a blast test looks like. And you take the vehicle out and you use the defined threat on it and you blast it. And inside the vehicle are a bunch of instrumented dummies, basically, that record all the G-forces and everything else that happens to them during the blast. And you can find out whether or not the people inside the vehicle would have survived that. And that's the kind of thing that we did, and the Defense Department does every time they develop something in which is life-critical technology. And it should be standard practice in autonomous vehicles as well. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is how now we're getting to the stage. Well, how do we do it for autonomous vehicles? What could the requirements be that would make them safer, and how would they be tested? So one of the things that every car has to do, one of the things we all have to do, is demonstrate that we can stop safely in an emergency. And this is an example about how you would develop a test for that for an autonomous vehicle. And it's from the news again, and the news article says, watch Tesla's full self-driving just flat out fail to see a deer in the road. So if you'd click it, I think the video will play. Try it again. Or no, go back. It should have played. Go back to the next one.
Hold on.
Yeah,
There we go.
here we are.
Yeah.
So you could just see the last second there, the deer in the road come into the car. Now go to the next slide because I wanted to examine it a little bit and talk more about how a test and requirements could be. So if you look at the video and you do the stop motion and everything else, you can actually see the deer out in front of the car. And I've put the red arrow and the little circle around it where I see it. And I call that time equals 0. And then I just count the time on the video, and about 2 seconds later, the car actually hits the deer. There's no braking. There's no any indication at all that the car saw the deer or tried to avoid the deer. And if you actually go to the video at the link online and watch it, you can see the taillights in the left picture of the car in front. Oops.
Sorry.
It's okay. You don't have to go to the video. I just wanted to mention that on the picture, on the left-hand side, you can see the car in front, the taillights of the car in front. And in the video, when you first watch it, I didn't realize it, but that car actually swerves to avoid the deer and then goes back. And then you see the deer like you see it here, and then you actually hit the deer. And this is every Tesla car has video cameras in it, and this video is from the car. And so it's part of the sensing system of the car that's supposed to detect objects and avoid them or provide safe driving. And so the question is really, well, could anybody have not just avoided it, but stopped in time? And I looked up, what are the average human brake reaction times for people? And the NIH has data. Our government has an incredible amount of data about all kinds of things. And they've studied that, and it says a brake reaction shows that the average brake reaction for males is a half second, and for females it's 0.53 seconds. And what that tells you is that everybody would have applied the brakes before they hit the deer. And whether they hit the deer or not, they probably would have stopped in time. It depends on how fast they were going, or they would have applied the brakes and been able to avoid the deer.
Peter, what's the date of the video? Do you know?
It's if you go back to the previous slide, the link will take you to this. I think it's on the 29th of October.
So it's very recent.
It's very recent, yeah. But if you go to the MSN website, it'll have the date on it. But I have 29th of October there.
It's right here at the bottom, 29th
Yeah.
of October.
Yeah. We had someone give a talk about sensors on these vehicles. Are there any regulations related to sensor types? For example, an infrared. I don't know if this is infrared or
No. There are no regulations whatsoever. And in the beginning, when Tesla started doing their first self-driving car development, they had LiDAR, which is a fantastic sensor for the self-driving cars. But then they decided to save money because LiDAR is expensive and video cameras are cheaper. And so they put cameras on. And there's no requirement for sensing anything. There's no requirements at all for self-driving cars, period. The only requirement is, in most cases, that there be a safety driver. Every driver has to pay attention and be able to intervene. And this reaction time becomes really important because if you're paying complete attention and you're letting the car drive itself, in an emergency, it's still going to take you a half second to put the brakes on. And if you're going 60 miles an hour, you're going 88 feet per second. You've traveled 44 feet before you even put the brakes on. And that's if you're paying perfect attention. And if I'm not driving, I'm probably going to be talking to Sandra. There are people who read. I mean, it's not practical to have a human monitor because humans will fail a lot of the time just when they're needed to. And for some reason on the slide here, the part I wanted to emphasize in the box tomorrow all of a sudden has very large type, but it says emergency. If there were an emergency stop or obstacle avoidance requirement based on the performance of the average human driver, the Tesla would fail that requirement in a driving test. And it's a reason to have these independent tests because Tesla would fail it. They would be able to fix it before they deployed their vehicles on the road. Cruise would have the same requirement. Every other autonomous vehicle would have the same requirement. And we would know that, they wouldn't be hitting deer, at least at night. And maybe if the requirement included snow and ice and rain and daytime and heavy traffic, you'd have a reasonable chance of not hitting stuff, just like a normal driver has. And that would be the goal. It would be to have a self-driving car drive the car at least as safely as a human does.
Yeah, I'm going to be rather cynical, if I may.
Sure.
In terms of business, and in fact, in terms of people making decisions about driving dangerous or doing dangerous things, if the value of doing the driving or having a self-driving vehicle is far more than the risk that they perceive that it poses to them, they will buy. And I have a feeling that's what many of these AV companies are really pushing.
I agree with you 100%. And the fact is, everybody thinks it's going to happen to somebody else.
Right.
And, the somebody else might be the pedestrians that have already been killed by Teslas, for example. And if you think about, and go into any city, and I live near San Francisco, and, think about the cars that are there and the times that people have stopped while I cross in the crosswalk. And then there's a car that may not stop. The people in the car are going to say, "Oh, too bad, but I'll be dead."
Yeah.
It's not okay with me.
It reminds me of tobacco.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Let's take, John had a question. John had
Okay, well, I just lowered my hand because you just brought up the point that I was just going to bring up, which is obvious, that the deal with the deer is not the deer, it's the person.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the deer and you say, oh, well, my car might have hit the deer and I might have cracked my windshield, but I probably would have been okay. But it isn't the person in the car that we're concerned about. It's the deer, which is actually a person getting hit.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it also is the person in the car because that's a deer. But I grew up on a farm, and a friend, a neighbor of ours was driving one day, and he hit a horse in the road and it killed him. So there's another one. Or they hit, and there's an example of a self-driving car in the San Francisco area in which it followed the line straight into a bollard and killed the driver. That was like 2007, 2008. So you never know, right? Today, you never know whether it's going to kill you or somebody else, but the facts are it's nobody's protected. And, some sort of requirement is needed to say at least avoid something.
Break for moose.
Yeah, moose is worse. Yeah.
Let's take a question from Mark before we continue.
Sure.
It strikes me that there's a confounding issue here, and I'm curious how much it's discussed, is sort of the short game against the long game. So the short game is trying to fit this new technology into an extremely well-established infrastructure. We are clearly focused on that when it comes to charging the vehicles and the infrastructure to get them charged, but they're living in an environment that has developed over the last 125 years, where it took a long time for us to get to the first automated traffic light. So we've been through that in one sense before, but now we're trying to fit these into high speed, high impact, almost intuitive infrastructure that we've all grown up in. But if we look at the life of a car being, let's just give it a really long life, 20 years, these capabilities are going to be built into vehicles increasingly to the point that they'll be in all vehicles at some point. But the infrastructure also has to support that. I mean, I've read many articles, presuming what the future is going to look like with AVs, where there won't be any traffic jams because there will be literally inches between cars as they're communicating with each other. I'm wondering how much, A, you agree with that, and B, how much discussion is going on that these are really two separate issues. One is taking this new technology that has to almost shuffle into the world we live in. And then there's a question of what does the world look like when the current driven car is no longer as common.
Okay, and let me start with the first one, which is the things like the cars that can follow each other a couple inches apart and so on. And I think there really are two different things. One is an efficiency kind of argument that says, here's how we can get traffic to move more effectively, get more cars on the road, and reduce the time everybody is taking to get from A to B. And I think that's part two of the technology. The first part is the most important part, which is, are they going to be safe enough to use for everybody? And after that, then we can say, well, let's evolve the software so you can only follow a couple of inches behind somebody. You can still react faster, even if the guy in front of you is a human driver, and avoid an accident. And I don't think anybody's even doing the work right now to say whether that's even possible. But you would want to know before you release that to everyone that it actually works reliably and doesn't cause an accident. And it all comes back to the validation test for me. I think when we start having validation test requirements, a driving test that includes all these different things that a vehicle does as we normally drive them, then the technology will evolve very quickly, because nothing like working backwards from the answer for an engineer. I mean, all of us did that when we were in school. And if we know the answer, I mean, it's a lot easier to work backwards from the answer than it is to work forward and think you might have the answer right. At least that's the way it was for me. So did I get to your question about that?
Marv,
I think-
I think you're muted, Marv.
He's not muted, but we can't hear him.
Oh. I'm not muted. Do you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now we hear you. Now we hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
It didn't. At any rate, is it just a question between, the integration of this into an established system that we have
yeah.
versus a restructuring of the system? I mean, we're going through that with high-speed rail. You keep the same tracks, so you do different tracks.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how much of a discussion there is, since we know that the current vehicles on the road have a limited future. And so,
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, but that was really it. I'm curious how
Okay.
much of a discussion
No,
is
I
going
gave this,
on about
I
that.
thought about this a lot. And what I would like to do as a taxpayer is not spend any money. I don't want my taxes to go up. And to me, and especially since it seems to take forever for the transportation industries to put, signs up and paint stripes on the road and everything else. And I remember driving when they built Interstate 80 and all the different interstates around, how long all of that took. And I just don't want to wait. So it would be so much better for everyone if it's seamlessly integrated into what we already have today, which means the stoplights that are already there, the stop signs that are already there, the road markings, the other signs, parking places, everything that's already there, to me, is a requirement. If you want to have a self-driving car, then let it exist in the existing environment. We don't want to spend money to improve the environment just for the car.
Yeah. I agree. Let's continue. You have one final slide, I think.
Yeah, I do. It's a summary, but please go to it. This is really the question is, how can safe autonomous vehicles be developed and deployed? And here's my thought about that. And I think what we would do if we were, based on my experiences, we would have a process that we derive from our past experience. And it would start with requirements, which is, what does the self-driving car actually have to do to be safe? And the way to get at that, I think, is that the Department of Transportation and all the insurance companies have this mountain of data about accidents and what the accident causes were. And if any of you have been in an accident, and I have as a passenger, you know that the police come and they fill out a police report, and that's data because it says, well, I didn't see it. That was a very common accident kind of explanation. And this mountain of data can be mined, so to speak, to find out what are the common causes of accidents. And I didn't see it has to be one of them. And that goes to sensing requirements. So what didn't you see? And you didn't see the car, you didn't see the stop sign, you didn't see the stoplight, you didn't see the deer in the road. And those ought to all be boiled down into requirements. Well, you should have seen the deer in the road at least far enough ahead to stop. And then all of those things should happen over the entire operating envelope of the car. Day, night, winter, summer, everything else, fog, all the things we normally drive in as humans can be included in these requirements. And then we have another place that will give us really, really valuable information that we can use for requirements because there have been so many crashes and incidents on autonomous vehicles. And we can say, well, we don't want that. And so the cause of that autonomous vehicle crash can be written into the requirements for the next autonomous vehicles in a test. And so you can come up with all these requirements. And I just now want to say something about requirements because it sounds like a horrible thing. But my experience with developing new technologies for the Department of Defense is that the Department of Defense has done a fantastic job of saying what the technology has to do. It enables a more efficient development. It enables a faster development. It tells all the engineers, the rocket has to fly so high or so far or for so, whatever it is that has to happen. And that takes a lot of the power of the corporate accountants away. Because if you go to a corporate accountant, I see you, Walter, if you go to a corporate accountant is going to say, well, I don't want to spend the money to do that. But if my argument back is, well, it's a requirement, so we have to do it and prove that it works. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is in regards to the version of the hardware. I think some of us have seen a video on YouTube of a guy with a brand new Tesla and meaning a month old with brand new hardware, because now they're using different hardware than maybe certainly my Tesla that I had 3 years ago had the old hardware which used radar.
Yeah.
But now it's all visual. And so we saw this car, and then we also saw a Tesla being summoned at a Costco, meaning it backed out of the parking spot and drove over to the driver. And so in your case, Peter, and also Bob, what version hardware had you been using, and what version of software? I think the software is up to 12.5 and going on to 13 now. And how does that interrelate with the safety concerns that you brought up today?
Okay, well, let me answer the second part, because the first question, what I'm using, shouldn't matter. And the reason I say that is because for every update that is posted on an aircraft, for example, if they want to change something, like part of the engine or anything else, or even just replace parts on the engine, they have to be certified to be okay. And that's the same thing that should happen for self-driving cars. I mean, if you change something on a self-driving car, how do you know that it's still safe? And
Well,
if you change the brake pads or you change something like that, you'd know, because that's a known factor. But if you change the software update or you change the sensor from LiDAR to cameras because you want to save money in production, well, how do you know you're still detecting the deer? And so then you would go back to a driving test and say, okay, let's prove it. Let's do the original tests all over again. And maybe you don't have to go all the way back to that because you're replacing just a component that you can validate in a different way. But that's what the aircraft guys do. I mean, if they wanted to introduce a new material or anything else, they have to go through a certification or a recertification process to prove that it's as good as the stuff they're replacing.
Sure. I would agree. But so my Tesla from 3 years ago, it had a radar and cameras, but I would get false stops.
Yep.
Slam on the brakes, and I think they deleted the radar because of the confusion between the visual signal and the radar signal, and so they got rid of one. But this deer, I think, probably could have been picked up by either LiDAR or radar,
Yes,
effectively.
but also in our Tesla, it's newer than that. It doesn't have radar, and it still has the false stops, and that's a failure of a driving test.
Oh, it still has the false stops.
Still has the false stops.
Wow.
And it almost drove me into a truck because it followed a painted line, that was old during a construction thing. And so it's just driving straight towards a barrier in a truck right there. And it's like, how can this happen? And
Yeah.
but your point is exactly the point. It's like it may work today, but if you change something, is it going to work tomorrow?
Mhm.
And that's got to be part of the certification and compliance process.
Validation. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Before we turn to the other hands, I see a lot of hands up, so I want to take them, but I just want to ask a question. I'd like to drive, I really do. And I'm wondering about the market for AVs. and your perception of this. I can take your point earlier. You made the observation that from the point of view of the mobility of an aging population, this may be a real asset. But what is your sense of the market in general? Is that the driver, or do people really want to have to walk away from driving cars?
I don't really know for sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, like I've driven, I tried to add up how many miles I've actually driven because I've owned like 14 cars.
Yeah.
And I've probably driven, certainly over 500,000 miles. And there's plenty of times in which especially when I was commuting more than an hour each way to work, that I would really rather have let somebody else drive. And I've worked in other countries too, and I've actually really enjoyed when, there were chauffeurs driving me around.
Yeah.
And especially in India, I was there for 6 months and didn't drive at all. I had a chauffeur for everything, and I liked it. So I think, people who really like to drive and I was one of them. I've owned like a Lotus and, a Porsche and other cars. I mean, I really like driving them. And I built a street rod, and I like driving that. And, so you can still do that. But for everyday use, I would rather just be driven, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take some other questions. I'm not sure whose hand was up first, but let's go to Bob, and then we'll move through. Bob, you want to ask? You're muted, Bob.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure this is a question or a comment.
It's a comment. So if you want, we'll have a question in it, but if you want the questions, then pass me by.
Okay. I think, Bob, I called on you, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, it's an observation as somebody who does regularly drive a Tesla 3. And to answer Eddie's question, I have 12.5.4.2. My daughter has just got a Cybertruck, and they're downloading 5.5 on it, and that already is an improvement over what we have. We were driving it the other day, and making a left turn. A pedestrian came from behind a car and crossed. There was no crosswalk, and there was nothing other, and it behaved better than I probably would as a driver in that context. My version would not have done that. And Peter, I don't know when you drove from Texas with your original model and have not used FSD since then, but I use it continually on anything longer. We drive from our home in Winchester, Mass to Cape Cod, and I'll put full self-drive on. It'll drive all the way to the Cape to our homes without an incident. Now, I understand I'm a very small part of a universe, and there's a lot of other stuff that's going on and going wrong. So my second point would be, I strongly support your notion that there ought to be requirements that are independently enforced. But the notion that just by my driving experience, that this is really a quite dangerous world that we're in right now, within the universe that I'm driving, seems to me, for me, it's overblown. That is, I'm very comfortable with what I'm experiencing. That may be the wrong world that I'm experiencing. And the final point I would make is, for Tesla and any of these other, well, I've got 2 points. One, the last one, for any company that's doing this, particularly Tesla, it obviously, whatever may be the cost cutting and the business proposition that we all recognize, it also has to be in their interest to make their cars ever safer. And that's one of the reasons why you have this system with the data collection, that when it kicks out, that gets reported, or at least you can report it. I've had some question about how much of incidents are actually being fed into the data, or whether it's only the stuff that when it kicks out, I have to report what's happened. I have to hit a button and tell them what's happened and why it's kicked out. But my assumption is that they are continually trying to meet the kind of standards that you say should be there on their own. But I agree that it ought to be independently verified along the line. The final thing, it would be this question about the technology and the original LiDAR with vision that Musk abandoned with some resistance within the company, you may remember. And he did it. In the end, he argued that it was the fusion argument that Eddie pointed to a moment ago. But I think in the end, it's been cost. He thinks he can do it a lot better. But I wanted to read one other thing of a company in Japan or in China, because these guys are moving on this stuff as well. And this company is NEO, and I'll read to you what is their technology right now. And this is the E7 that they have, high quality performance. It has 33 high performance sensing units, including an ultra long range, high resolution LiDAR, 7/8 MP high resolution cameras, 4 3P light sensitive surround view cameras, an ADM, an advanced driver monitoring system, and 5 multimeter wave rocket 12 ultrasonic sensors. So it sounds like they're putting an awful lot into their and my assumption is in the end that technology is going to be safer than what Tesla's working with.
I agree with you. And the thing that and you repeated several times about assumptions, which, you know, I share those. I mean, I think anybody, you know, the people in Tesla, the engineers, they're doing the work and everything, they're trying to do safe things. And, you know, and I malign the cost cutters and everything else because it's really an accounting exercise and not an engineering exercise. And I have a bias about that. But the point is that actually nobody really knows for sure. And it's because you're trusting your life to it, I think it merits an independent test. You know, I don't want to take somebody's word, just trust me. Even though I believe, just like right now, that Tesla is probably safe enough. But I've read enough about it. I've seen enough instances. I've been involved in this now for a couple of years, and it's just not good enough for me. So
let's go to Tom.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure this is a comment or a question, but yeah, I agree with you that like any well-practiced engineer, you know, who's building a system wants to test as they fly. You know, that's the best thing that you're going to do. You know, on the real conditions. From the business perspective, you know, you want to have as unregulated environment as possible so you can develop as quick as possible. But the other question I've seen, though, is I just watched this video that Ron sent out about a guy driving fully autonomously through Boston. And one thing I learned on that, you know, I wasn't aware of is, you know, that, you know, Tesla does get back information, you know, gets back data. And so they're learning essentially all the time. So really the question comes in here is how do you actually sort of like balance these two things? You know, they're learning. So the more drive miles they get on their vehicles, the more people who drive them put more information in their database, and so they get better. So at some point, you know, you can almost argue, and I don't know, maybe I'm being unrealistic, that they're naturally going to get better because you're going to learn better, more. So where's the balance? And now in this sort of new, let's call it deregulatory world we're in, where's that balance you really think? What's the
there's two parts of that. There's two parts of that to me. And one of them is how much of that learning is it going to take before they're really safe? And that's why that miles driven statistic is really important to me because it says a lot. And the second part goes along with that, which is, okay, so Tesla is learning from it, but what about Cruise? And what about the next guy and the next guy? And so, you know, if there's 15 programs already underway for autonomous vehicles and everybody's headed in that direction, and then we get cars from Korea and we get cars from Japan and we get cars from whoever knows best or knows whoever not knows best, but whoever is interested in autonomous vehicles or thinks that there's a business opportunity there, how many times are we going to repeat the Tesla experience?
Yeah.
With hundreds of crashes and deaths and dozens of deaths involved. And I just don't, I think there's a better way. And, it's not, I'm not saying it won't work that way. It's just that it seems like the public has to pay too high a price.
Okay.
Tom Halper.
Just a quick comment about the safety level. You mentioned the average driver as safe as an average driver. I really like that UK competent and careful drivers.
Yeah, me too.
Because I have a friend who was hit broadside by someone texting going through a red light, and I see so many people looking into their screens driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in my world, one of the things that I would really like is that, and I've done this, and I should really give you a little more background about the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, the JLTV. When that program started in 2006, most of the government said that it was impossible to replace the Humvee. It had to do too many things. It was impossible to replace it. And so the Department of Defense collaborated with industry to say, is it really impossible? And what requirements should we not include so that we can actually have the vehicle we need? And I was part of that collaboration. And so we wrote the requirements together. And for example, one of the requirements that didn't make it into the final program was helicopter lift, which is a really hard requirement for an armored vehicle because they weigh a lot. And so, there were things like that the Army had decided that they wanted, and actually the Defense Department, because they cooperated with all the branches. And I think that's what actually needs to happen now, which is the autonomous vehicle developers need to collaborate with the government on what's needed to guarantee that things are safe and what's possible, and get some regulations that everybody can live with.
Avi?
I just came back from Phoenix, and it was the first time I saw autonomous vehicles actually on the road. And there were these white cars, and they had on top of them that a cylinder rotating. I guess it's some kind of radar.
Yeah, that's LiDAR. Those are Waymos. Yeah.
Is that what they are?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, for first I just stood there and watched it because it's interesting to see a car go by itself, look like a regular car, except you looked in the driver's seat. I would think they would put a dummy or something so people would feel better. It looked like there's a driver. But I asked, at one point I was on a shuttle bus from the hotel to the airport, and I asked the bus driver about those cars. And he said they're awful. They cut you off. If they want to get in, if they want to sort of get in, if you're there and they want to get in front of you, they honk the horn a couple of times and then they go right in. And so now this is just one, although professional driver's opinion, but apparently he was not pleased with them. I couldn't help but think causing accidents that they wouldn't be allowed in the city of Phoenix, but I don't know. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the objective here is you're never going to get an automated car that has no accidents, but they probably will be better than the human driver when the whole thing gets refined. And as to the number of cars, if this process really works, I know Ron mentioned that some of us like to drive, and it's true, but you'll have cars coming to your door and taking you where you want to go. There probably will be fewer cars because there won't be necessity for having them and all the costs that could be saved. I've had 3 Teslas, Model S. I was disappointed in the last one because of the control functions. You have to stroke the screen to shift. They somehow became obsessed with not having any stalks, as they call them. And it was much more difficult. I now have a Lucid, which so far drives well has different control issues. But I will say that I didn't never like the autonomous driving because you had to keep your hand on the wheel and jiggle the wheel. And if you didn't jiggle it enough, then it would give you a warning and tell you if you jiggled it too much, you took it out. So I figured, look, I'm going to have to be having my hands on the wheel and moving it. I might as well steer it.
Exactly.
I do use the adaptive cruise control, but as you say, I had a near accident. You know, you're supposed to be able to change lanes just by putting on the directional signal. And I did that on Route 93 here in San Francisco. It's a major interstate here that goes north-south. And I noticed I was in lane 3 and then lane 4. I could see in the mirror there was a car back there. I thought the car had plenty of time to change lanes, but it didn't. Something else good. It's going to wait till it passes. Well, it waited until the car was almost next to me before it decided to change lanes. I, of course, grabbed the wheel, and it became a non-incident worth 30 seconds of conversation. But for a fraction of a second and things just slightly different, there would have been it would have been a major accident. So it's just clearly a work in progress, and you're right when you say we need to have some kind of testing regimen. I was thinking, as you said, it passed the regular driver's test that a human has to go through, but that's not enough because the human driver is not asked to brake because a deer crossed in front of the road. There's something about the human intelligence that goes beyond the driving test, and I think that's what's going to have to somehow be incorporated into what the Waymos or the Teslas of the future are going to have to pass.
I agree with you 100%. You know, and the driving test also includes a vision test. And, you know, I think of the same things that you're saying. I mean, we have to be smart. I mean, there's probably a whole academic subject area just beginning to grow about that, and an industry about to begin that's about sensing for cars and getting the safety and the ability to interpret the environment like a human does, which is what really we're asking.
One small point, someone in chat pointed out that I guess somebody owns a Tesla, and at 3 a.m. this morning, the horn went off to inform the owner that it was 80% charged.
Yes, you can turn that off.
Let's go to Eddie for the final question today.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, it raised an interesting point before. How about AV-caused accidents, secondary accidents that don't involve the actual AV? Because it just confuses, say, a human driver and bang. That's one point. The other point is the potential for sharing data amongst all the AV companies, having some kind of requirement so that they could learn from each other. And that would require standards like IEEE standards or something of that genre. And I wondered if anything of those are occurring.
Not to my knowledge, but something like that would be really valuable and useful, I think.
Yeah. Peter, I want to thank you for this perspective today. You can tell from the questions and the comments that this is a very interested group, and we appreciate all of your insights. It's been very, very, for me, a very informative conversation. I just want to close with one observation, and I think, you know, the introduction of any new technology into the marketplace is something of a double-edged sword. Almost always, maybe not always, but almost always. For example, this could be incredibly useful in terms of increasing the mobility of an aging population, as we mentioned earlier. That has real merit. But I also worry, given that it represents an integration of an automated vehicle with AI, with you know, navigational systems that may be derived from artificial intelligence and whatever. I just wonder about the potential abuse in the sense of people wishing to do harm to drivers and saying, all right, I'm gonna somehow mess up his electronics and he's not going to know it, and run his vehicle into a wall. What is your concern about that?
I think those are possibilities, and that's already something that's an issue addressed, for example, in the Defense Department, and just even in your iPhone, that's a possibility somebody could spoof that, and it's the same thing. There have to be safeguards that say, somebody can't come in and just rewrite your software, so to speak. And that would be included is a requirement. I don't know how you test for that. I don't, that's not anything close to any expertise I have. But certainly you wouldn't want anybody to just take over your car. So,
Well, if I could jump in for a second on that. I got it. One of the Teslas I got was what we used to call a demonstrator. And it was used when customers come in, they want to test drive. So it had a few miles on it. I had some success with gasoline powered cars, so I got this. And I was driving also on 93, and I got to about 65 miles an hour, and I noticed that the vehicle wasn't going to go any faster than that. And I realized they put a speed governor on it so that when people test drove, they wouldn't put it to the floor, take it to 110. And I called them, and they said, "Oh, yes, we forgot to take it off. We'll take care of that." And in just a few minutes, it was done by satellite control, and it was removed. And I found myself thinking, if they can get into the vehicle and control the speed governor, but what if the Chinese or some other bad actor, the Iranians, pick your villain, wanted to cause disruption? You could do this wholesale, and I figure that probably there's a lot of computer technology that's out there, even in not the sophisticated electric cars, where, from above, you could come in and cause disruption now. So, and you could cause real havoc, as you can imagine, on the highways and therefore in society. So that's not something to be concerned in terms of the future. I just wonder how we protect against hacking now.
exactly. Even there's enough technology already out there that somebody who wanted to do something like that could shut a city down by blocking roads. Because there's enough Teslas, when they got to all the main freeway entrances into San Francisco, and just stop the cars. And then
I think that
I'm afraid I opened up the conversation. It's going to lead us on a very dark end to our conversation here. But Peter, I don't know. Thank you. I really do. This has been a wonderful meeting, and your presentation puts the perspective that we all needed. So I thank you for on behalf of all of us for joining us today.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for letting me speak.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and
Peter.
finally, thank you for getting up so early in the morning in California. We'll meet again, folks, in 2 weeks, and we'll hear from Walter Hubbard speaking about abuse to electronics. He's going to talk about why good computers can be used badly. I think that's the title, isn't it, Walter?
Why bad things happen to good computers.
Oh, okay. Okay. He's going to talk about cyber scammers and so on, but we'll meet again in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Take care of yourself.
Very good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.